Hi folks, we're just giving a few moments here at the top for Zoom to let everybody in before we get started with tonight's event. If you are already in tonight's webinar with us, you can open up your chat window and find some information about how to purchase books by tonight's featured authors. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Chelsea from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Nana Nkweti, presenting her new book, Walking on Cowrie Shells. She'll be talking with Novuyo Rosa Tshuma, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Nana, Novuyo, and the team at Grey Wolf Press for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now we have just a few housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and interact with fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Walking on Cowrie Shells, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person in our bookstore locations, noon to 7 p.m. every day of the week, and you can purchase Nana's book and many others on site. Or order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop that buy link in the chat. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer tonight is Novuyo Rosa Tshuma. She is a 2020 Lannan Fiction Fellow and the author of the novel House of Stone, winner of a 2019 Edward Stanford Travel Writing Award and the 2019 Bulawayo Arts Award for Outstanding Fiction, and listed for the 2019 Orwell Prize, the 2019 Dylan Thomas Prize, the 2019 Rathbones Folio Prize, and the 2020 Balcones Fiction Prize. She's been invited to give public lectures about House of Stone at the University of Oxford, the Nordic Africa Institute, and Vassar College. She is taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop and is assistant professor of fiction at Emerson College. She'll be speaking with our featured author, Nana Nkweti. She is an AKO Caine Prize finalist and alumna of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her work has garnered fellowships from McDowell, Kindle, Uncross, UCross, and the Wurlitzer Foundation, among others. She's a professor of English at the University of Alabama. Her new book, Walking on Cowrie Shells, is a powerful genre-bending debut story collection, mixing deft realism with clever inversions of genre. The book has been praised by celebrated writers such as Carmen Maria Machado, Yaji Assi, Karen Russell, and Andrew Sean Greer, who says, "What an intoxicating book. Magical, funny, inventive, and joyous, Nkweti's tales remind us what storytelling can be." Nana is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with Novuyo and with all of you. Nana, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you all for coming and joining us this evening. Thank you, Chelsea, for that lovely introduction. I'm incredibly grateful to be here, particularly because Greenlight bookstore was my neighborhood bookstore in BK for many, many moons. I actually had gone to Iowa and then I came back and it was like, wow, there's a Greenlight at the very corner of Fenimore Street and Flatbush Avenue, and I lived on Fenimore Street. So I was like, oh, okay, this is some kind of serendipity, like, you know, you better finish this book so you can see, so you can read it there. But COVID had other, like, you know, other plans for us, you know, best laid plans, right? But I hope to be there with you guys in person someday. And this is, you know, the next best thing I'm excited to kind of share with you tonight. So because I'm going to be reading about, you know, to my Brooklyn bookstore, I thought I'd read a little excerpt from Kinks, one of the stories in the collection. And it is based in Brooklyn, and it's a Brooklyn Harlem love affair. I call this story A Tale of Heartache and Hair Grease, and it is broken up into sections named after a Black woman's hairstyles. And the Black woman at the center of this story is named Jennifer Chandep, and she is in love with a firebrand of a man named Dr. Kwame Johnson. And their story is a testament that the road of relationships can sometimes be a crooked one, full of complications and full of kinks. All right, first hairstyle. Pressed. When Jennifer was a child, her mother had pressed her kinks with a hot comb each Saturday night. By Sunday morning, her hair was as starch straight as pleats of her church dress. When she was bright-eyed in Sunday school, Jennifer saw her obedience as Christ-like, saw the lick of holy fire in the blue flames of the oven range, grew to welcome, hands meekly folded in her lap, the molten hot comb as God's shining instrument. It was about enduring, a test and a testimony. She never squirmed, though her mind filled with premonitions of hellfire during the brimstone sizzle of her strands. Still, there were signs and wonders to be had in the steadiness of her mother's hand. She was never burned, bore no errant mark of Caine. Her mother was faithful to those evening rituals, those kitchen vespers. God forbid the rapture come and her child was found nappy and wanting. As a young woman, Jennifer and her hair grew unruly, roamed free and unfettered, nights wild and her own. This was how she felt now on the Saturdays that Kwame came to her, demanding many things, both monstrous and delightful. She learned to relish Sunday morning's bruises as the signs and wonders of their sweet tussle. She learned to relish Sunday morning. She knows that she had to mark him with tooth and nail and the slick of her tongue too. Only with him did she discover her appetites, how she liked the rough mouthful that was the word fuck on her tongue, almost as much as the thing itself. How she liked to trace her toe along the seam of him, just to watch him go shivery, becoming a herky-jerky, a creature unspooled. After Kwame had gone back to parts unknown, she would lie there short of breath, yet finally fully alive, her face pressed to the sheets to catch remnants of his smell, a smoky, spicy thing that brought to mind foreign altars where the righteous sacrifice loved ones to their insatiable gods. Next hairstyle, blowout. Kwame kept her in bed for days at a time, sweating out her blowout, edges and toes curling again and again. In moments between, Jennifer would lie along the stalk of him, tracing twin scars along the hollow of his side. Battle wounds, he'd answer to questions unspoken. Ear to chest, hairs tickling her cheek, his voice a grumbling lullaby telling tales of ancestors, of kings, of queens from Africa past. He claimed them by birthright. No genealogy sites had traced his DNA across the diaspora, yet by his estimate, Kwame was descended from Sheba and Sundiata, from Makeda and Menelik. He joked about his credentials, a Morehouse, Princeton, and a Harvard alum, bread and buttered on the stoops of Bed-Stuy, where your street cred, the only pedigree that truly mattered, was measured by number of shots survived, by who and how many feared you. Kwame was cocky, completely at ease in his own skin and his own identity. What did she know of this grand history? He was cocky and she thought it was seductive as fuck. Head on his chest, Jennifer sometimes bit down on his nipple till she drew blood, craving him, suckling in that knowing ease for herself. He was cocky. What did she know of this? She, the child of timid mother, ever grateful for kitchen scraps, one of only 2 Black girls in her Scarsdale elementary school. Her mother had stayed mute on the subject of their culture. What did she know her heritage, her brilliant ancestry? No matter how many boardrooms, doors Jennifer walked through, sometimes she felt her steps falter. In the Ghanaian beauty shop, at Awing tribal meetings, she felt like a counterfeit African, felt the unworthiness of the maid's child creeping in through the servant's entrance, felt uncertain, her steps faltering, like she was walking on Cowrie Shells. Right, thank you.
Nana.
Hey baby, my Zim baby.
It's such an honor and a delight to be speaking with you about this, virtuosic work. There's no other way to describe it. It's even better to hear you read. And as you were reading, I was wondering, are you going to do the audio?
Oh my goodness, you know how many people keep on coming for my neck with that? Like, they're like, you better read the audio to this girl.
I can hear the cadences as you're reading. It's gorgeous. And so, yeah.
I was interested in reading the audio initially, but then I have a Kentucky boy in there, and I have some male narrators, and I was a little, hesitant about trying to do a Kentucky drawl. I don't know if I have to take some voice lessons or something like that, because I was just like, I don't know, because his voice is supposed to be honky tonk and hard boiled. So I was just like, I can do hard boiled, but I can't do honky tonk. So I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, there's everything. There's French. There's some lovely French. There's.
I can do that. I can do French. I can do pidgin English. I can do, grammar, as I call it. But I don't know about the Kentucky drawl. So.
Oh, fantastic! First of all, congratulations, Nana.
Thank you so much, dear.
Reading this book, I was like, I have missed. Thank goodness, I've missed Nana's writing. Reading this work, just on the language level, is an experience in and of itself. And each story here is one that requires you to sit and savor it. I think listeners, when just the language, the cadences, the intimacy in the sentences, right? I think it really soaks you in. And so, I mean, each work here feels like its own sort of world, a whole complete world. And these stories range, as we heard, from sex, love, faith, romance, we have zombies, there's Comic-Con, all sorts of wonderful stuff. What it means to be Cameroonian, American, African. I just love the range of multicultural exploration in this work. What it means to be Black, what it means to be Black American. And this idea of belonging, where does one belong, and how does one belong? And that Kinks, one of my favorite collection stories here. You ended with the title of the book, right? Walking on Cowrie Shells. So let's start with the title, right? Because Cowrie Shells, they're very pretty, but I think of them also as delicate, right? When you step on them, they could prick, they could hurt you, potentially. So why this title? Why Walking on Cowrie Shells?
It's interesting that you talk about them being able to hurt you, because I literally when we were doing the book cover design, I was thinking about, okay, I wanted some of the shells to be broken. So that's on the shells, you'll see them, some are broken. And I was like, oh, could we add the speckles of blood on them or something so we could show? But, sometimes I get a little too ghoulish with it. I was like, oh, maybe too much blood is a bit too much. But I thought that, when I was thinking of them being delicate and something something the shards could hurt you. I was thinking this idea of like, that sense of belonging, right? That can be so easily fractured. As like, when I was reading that section of Kinks, you can see them talking about the idea of like trying to belong, especially when a lot of the stories are dealing with like people who are in these liminal spaces, whether you're a teenager trying to figure out what the next step is, what your adult identity is going to be looking like, whether it's that kind of cultural identity that like, you're between I have Korean Americans and African, Cameroonian Americans and Nigerian Americans, whether you're trying to figure out what parts of those two cultures or like all these cultures you meld and everything, like you're a little bit tentative until you kind of come into fully realizing your full self, right? So you're like walking on eggshells. And then I could use the cowrie, because cowries are so significant in like, have a kind of Pan-African significance. They connoted royalty. They were used as currencies in many different traditions. So I thought it would be a wonderful way to kind of, I guess, like to kind of denote and kind of speak to that kind of like fragile identity, fragile sense of belonging, fragile state of like just a human being trying to kind of become, so.
Beautiful.
Walking on cowrie shells.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I actually know that cowrie shells are seashells. I saw cow. I just always, for some reason, thought they could. But so, Nana, starting off there, liminality, belonging. These stories are, I think of them as diasporic. I think of them as cosmopolitan in the true sense. And here, reading this, I get a different sense of the idea of an immigrant or the diaspora, right? From the many stories we see. These characters are deeply diasporic in a very global sense, right? Many of the lead characters are female, Black female, not all of them, right? One of my favorite stories is the zombie one, where we have this white male narrator telling the story. But so I wanted to ask, what's the diasporic influence here for you? Because this is a different sort of sense of, this innovates for me the immigrant genre, right? It doesn't sound like any of the immigrant works that we've read or that are popularized. It's a very innovative and new look at what it means to be an immigrant.
Yeah, because for me, like that sense of immigration, there's sometimes for some of my characters, right, they were squarely, brought up and raised and born here in America, and like the West, right? So like for some of them, like, that immigration would be going back home and trying to kind of like, make sense of that particular culture, right? So it's not particularly the traditional immigrant narrative where somebody comes here from Africa or from whatever country, and that's back home. I mean, I think back home for them, my characters sometimes can be like a sense of like, where their parents come from, a place that's kind of it's mythologized in their family lore and their stories and photo albums, but not all of them have stepped foot on the continent or been back to those homelands themselves, right? So for them, like that immigrant identity is more so like the received from their parents. They're trying to, kind of incorporate it into their sense of Americanness and what does it mean to be an American, especially in America sometimes where there's such an emphasis on this melting pot narrative, like everybody must kind of eschew their former identities to become American, which is like, we see more people who are, like we definitely see, like I grew up in, I was in New York, so it's just all about like, there's Chinatown and there's Little Italy. And so there's just such a sense of like, okay, yeah, we can honor these, traditions and these parts of ourselves. And that's American, right? So I think that is like the American that, a lot of my characters are growing up in, like they're trying to, they're third culture kids. Like they take that received culture from America and that received culture from their parents, and they make their third culture, their own culture, which is a hybrid identity. So that immigration is not such a clear-cut thing for them, right? It might just be a spiritual immigration or an immigration that's stories that are received from parents and they have a sense of that, but it's not necessarily their own narrative.
Yes. Beautifully put. One of the things I love and appreciated about these stories is that they question that very idea of what is Africa, what is America. These sort of essentialized spaces, and then here we have the third sort of identity that you talk about here, where it's as if, you know, the characters are creating, right, these spaces for themselves.
I mean, even back, let's be honest, even back home, right? Like, you know, and I think of Cameroon as back home. I lived in Cameroon, but even before that, before I ever went there, I still, you know, it's like I said, once again, my received homeland from my parents. But people back home are not so cut and dry. Like, I think, like, you know, we're always having this conversation about Africa being this continent and not this country, and people not understanding that even their notions, I mean, Africa is part of a global, you know, a global culture. So people are listening to hip hop and watching WandaVision and having their lives back home in Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Cameroon. And they're like, you know, so this kind of like, I guess, romanticized notion of like, you know, this noble savage is, I don't know who's, people are still out there hawking that. I don't know who that serves, but it's not, I don't know where that Never Land is anymore. So
it's outdated, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can go to the bush, and if the bushman got a cell phone, it's just like, what you gonna do? You know? The bushman is like, hello.
But even going beyond that, Nana, I do love even how your characters innovate even the idea of belonging. I'm thinking of Chambu. Is that how you pronounce Chambu in?
Yes, Chambu. Yeah.
Right, Chambu in Dance the Fear Dance.
Mm-hmm. Fire, bro! It's fire like fire burn.
Oh, fire!
Yes, my bad. I should have been telling people how to pronounce that thing. I should have I don't know how to write fire.
No, fear, fire. So when she's at the party, the baby shower, and Catherine calls her an akata. Please explain what akata is, because I had a jaw drop moment in that.
Yeah, akata is African American, right? And across Africa, I don't know where it comes from, like whose country it's from, but particularly in West Africa, it's almost like a pejorative for African American. And there's like these interesting diasporic, you know, tensions that I explored throughout the book. But like I have like characters who are African American and characters who are African, as I call them, which are African American or Black American, and have like a Cameroonian identity or Nigerian identity. And that's where that kind of interesting dialogue happens, in that space where like somebody is being called out as like kind of impure because they are half American or African American, and they're like, no, we're not gonna do that today. You know.
Chambu embraces that, and
yes, Chambu embraces that part of her, you know, of her heritage, and her father, who was a father who was so involved that he actually got a traditional name. He was kind of knighted by the chief of their parents' village, because he was so down for the people. And she's just like, look, you know, you're not gonna come for me like that, because you don't know the heritage of what African Americans did, so you could be here, you know, and calling me an akata, you know. So that's where like these interesting tensions that happen amongst, you know, unfortunately, sometimes we're our own worst enemies, you know. So I explore those things, you know, because I want people to have conversations around that, you know.
It's beautifully done. A lot of shade, very great dialogue. I did not like Catherine the moment she started speaking. So beautifully done.
You like the shade. Are you here for the petty? You're like, I want
some good shade. Take it. So we have Chambu, right? She embraces that. She's like, don't step on me like that. Then we have Jennifer from Kings, where you will. Jennifer is more vulnerable and not sure about where she fits in. And then there's the charming Kwame. I could, when he walked in, I could see that man. I could see it was delicious. But he sort of, and I don't want to use the word takes advantage, but he does sort of fill the space, her lack of certainty about where she belongs, whether she's African enough, right? So that's a different character who's more vulnerable.
Yes.
And so tell us about that. I mean, Kwame, I'll say, was an interesting character. I think it's very hard to do a Kwame character properly, right? This man who's pro-Africa, who's all about the motherland, he doesn't come off as a caricature. Beautifully done, right? So please tell me about Jennifer as a character.
Yeah, Jennifer, honestly, like, I wanted people to like it, because I think that like I'm talking about that liminality, and it's like very nice for me to say, oh yeah, you know, I completely embrace both of my sides of my identity. But all that I think is for anybody, that's a process, right? So Jennifer is like at a different space in that her process in terms of like her self-acceptance, in terms of like, her upbringing was not one that embraced that African identity and that African side of herself. As I mentioned in like in that excerpt, like, she grew up in a predominantly white enclave in upstate New York in Scarsdale. Her, as opposed to Kwame, who grew up in like this very Afrocentric and pro-Black and, environment in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. So the way you're raised and like nature versus nurture, the way you're raised and what you're told about yourself, what you're told to privilege about your identity can have it makes a difference in the way you view yourself in the world, right? If all you ever saw growing up, and I explore this in other parts of the book, is all you ever saw, if you grew up in American culture and all you ever saw was like African children in those marathons for starving children, and all you ever saw was, oh, there was a famine here, or oh, there was a war here. I mean, that can have a sense. Those are microaggressions against that particular part of your identity, right? That can have that, especially like I have Jennifer. These are people who are a little bit older. I think there's much more information, here on this generation has much more, information at their fingertips. They don't have to kind of just take in this receives, all good, news is bad news type of narrative that like, like I say, like a Jennifer or Kwame, somebody Jennifer Kwame's age, they receive their stuff via traditional news sources, which is kind of emphasized all these really negative headlines, right? So she, that's her sense of identity, like she's trying to still figure that out. She's successful, she loves her work, she's a successful editor, but then she's asked to kind of be in this space where she's supposed to be like the editor for like, she's at this large like global publishing house, but asked to be the editor for the Black folks, so it's like all these weird things are happening that have to push her to kind of interrogate, like, what does Blackness mean? Like, why did they ask me to be like the Negro whisperer, and what does that mean in terms of my own professional development? What does it mean to my personal development? What does Black, what kind of authors do I want to champion? So all these things are happening at the same time where she meets this man who's very, very sure of who he is, what he stands for, what Africanness is. So some of that she just wants for herself, right?
Yeah, Kwame's fervor for Africa sort of blinded him because he couldn't see Jennifer for who she was.
Yeah, I think he is definitely projecting like his Nubian queen on her, it's like, and they're like, like there's a Nubian queen for him out there, but maybe it wasn't Jennifer, you can't project, because I don't think, Kwame is an interesting character in that I don't think he's a bad person, I just think they're not equally paired. Like, like if you're looking for somebody who's going to give you that sense of like Afrocentricity and like she's going to be your Nubian queen and she's going to be all, kente clothed up and everything like that, and make you feel like you like you're in touch with the motherland every time you go out to dinner with her, it's not going to be Jennifer. It's not her. She's not the one.
I was wondering, could Kwame actually be paired with anyone though? That man, he's charming, but he's all kinds of arrogant. Is there anyone there for you, man? I don't know. I mean,
I have on my website, right? On my website, there's a how to date in the DMV, and it's all talking about all these different types of dudes. And Kwame is I mentioned it in that story, and Kwame's type is in there. So maybe.
Now, Nana, let's talk about genre. So virtuosic. I mean, I was so amazed, astounded. We have Comic-Con with the comic genre, we have the detective story. One of my favorite stories here. Even then within that detective story, there's this pairing of fiction and nonfiction. That was so moving as we read those little excerpts that tie in. I want to give it away for the readers. We have the zombie apocalypse. Okay, it is my top, if not one of the top. Every story is a favorite, but I got to that story, I screamed. It is like, whoa.
I love it.
There's a line there, don't bullshit a bullshitter, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining, clap hands. That was like, wow. And then, we have more of what you might call realism. I mean, we have sex workers. It is virtuosic. There's no other way of putting it. Please talk.
Thank you so much, dear.
No lies there, but talk to us about the genre. How are you able to straddle? There was some nice geeking in the Comic-Con in my research, because they were geeking together. It was beautiful. See these Black girls out at Comic-Con. You don't even see that on TV, right? Talk to us about your genre bending, your range, how are you able to? I was also impressed when I got a detective story again, range. It's like, okay, you pulled it off. How?
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that it worked, because you never know when you're like, well, first, like, shout out to my editor, Steve Woodward at Greenlight, who was just like, go more geeky now, like, go just lean into your let your free flag fly, because I am a big old blurred. I'm a Black nerd myself, and all these things are, as I explore these genres, is because I love these genres. Like, I love reading and writing across various genres. Like, I always tell people, since I was a young kid, like, I was writing Star Wars fan fiction, like, and writing myself into the narrative. So the Empire didn't have nobody who looked like me, so I put a little Black girl in there before she was canon in the actual Star Wars universe. Ditto with Pride and Prejudice, and meeting Lizzie Bennet was my best friend. So I was like writing little Black girls into Regency England. So that is how, like, my range of reading has always been rather robust since I was a child. So all these types of genres, the whodunit, the mystery, the Western, everything has influenced me in terms of like my development as a writer. So I always knew that I would try to write across as many genres as possible, right? I just knew I was going to. And so I feel like this, so people don't think I bamboozled them. In some ways, this book is my thesis statement, right? Like, it's just like saying, okay, here it is. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. You gotta have to rock with me and just trust that I'm going to, I'll try to give you interesting characters in some beautiful language, but that beautiful language might be at Comic-Con. That beautiful language might be in a zombie apocalypse, So I like to play with it. It's so much fun to me, right? Like, it's so much fun to me to play in these different little, pools and just like you splash around. And that's how that came to be. It's nothing really there was no plot to it. It was just like, okay, I just feel like, I think right now I want to do something that explores this Comic-Con world and the Black nerd experience. I want to write in that space. And then, just like honoring that and letting myself completely fall into that space, And then, of course, I've been in those African charismatic churches, right? So, and I've had people try to, to bless me from the spirit of spinsterhood. So it's just like, of course I got to write. I mean, it's the phrase itself. When you live a life, these things write themselves. Of course, there are things that are to the imagination. I have never seen a zombie, but I do love zombies, and I was interested in exploring ideas of the world's presentation and idea of Africa as this place of darkness. Since Conrad, Heart of Darkness, that idea of a place of Africa as a place of sickness, and I was going to write a dictator novel, which was I was looking at all those kind of things just to kind of discuss the world of Africa as how it's placed and positioned in the world, and I ended up doing a zombie romp for fun, and then exploring all those ideas and those themes that I wanted to explain, to talk about in that kind of political saga that I was going to write. So that's how those things happen. Like, it's very organic. What interests me about writing, my own interests, things that are happening in the world, and they just kind of meld together, and that's why it feels eclectic, and because I'm eclectic. So
gorgeous. I wanted to show the reader. So this is a lovely picture. This is the Comic-Con story. And so when we also talk about genre, there's this itself, it merges various genres. There are other photos here that are in conversation with the work, right? And the nonfiction. So eclectic, this is eclectic. Now let's talk about something you mentioned, language. Because you can think of this, it's themes. Themes connect the work. Language for me also connects this collection. I mean, I can open any page. And you read a sentence, and your sentence is a Medusa-like. I think of your sentences as muscular, not masculine, because feminine.
I understand.
They shape, they hold. You elevate. So I was thinking, you're not only writing different genres, you innovate the genre. And your language, the way you pay attention to language, I love language, by the way. I thought Baldwin here in the religion, The Devil is a Liar, that opening, where language takes on a spiritual cadence, and it morphs into the scene beautifully. The zombie story, the voice, the protagonist's voice is captured. Our girl who at first seems to be a village naive girl and turns into the sassiest and most, cunning. And tell readers about our girl. She's complex, right? At every point, language here for me, it shows you are a serious writer, even as a fun one. There is range in not just the genre, not just the writing tone. You play satire, and satire is hard to pull off. There's satire, there's levity, then we get dropped into these moments of deep emotion. Particularly, I'm thinking of the character who's trying to have a baby. Story. And Chambo as well. We have these deep moments where we learn about her past and sort of her relationship to the present without giving away. So your language is also not just language for its own sake. It gives us many cadences, which is why I said each story is its own universe. And I kid you not, readers, that is what this work is. Please, what is your relationship with language? Who are your influences? I thought, I mean, you're showing off on the page in a good way. It's like, okay. Your mind is like, and I kid you not, right? The work has been done, the collection speaks for itself.
Oh, thank you so much, dear. I'm so appreciative of that. Like, you're someone who I deeply I deeply respect as a person and a writer. So like, you know how to be my baby. Yeah, so the writing, like, I've always been very voice driven in terms of like how I enter a work in a world. So when I say that Kentucky story, like that Kentucky drawl and it just kills you inside, that voice was honky tonk and hard boiled. That voice in The Devil is a Liar, which is church-based, I call it lyrical and sermonic, The voice in Kings is sexy, sinister. So the voices are very specific to me. The voice of the narrator, or the voice of like if it's like a first person narrative, so that's what comes to me first, and then I enter a story. They come to me like almost like you meet somebody, have an interesting conversation with a stranger on a train, and and then they just start to, so did you hear about that story? And I'm just like, oh, that sounds juicy, tell me more. So I first of all have to be kind of struck with that myself, and then I start playing with it and talking with that person, and then that narrator almost takes over me to tell their story in that moment, So it's a conversation, it's a call and response of that energy, of that language, and each of the, and then once that narrator starts talking to me and I'm telling their story, the language of that world just lends itself to all these different things, So if I'm in the church, I gotta add a praise Jesus, there's gotta be a hallelujah, and they're just ways of saying things in the church. Like, you're always like, we're having so we would say that Rosa and I are having a good conversation on today. We're not just saying today, we're just like on today. So it's just like a way of saying things that are specific to these worlds, and like, Batman got a bomb booty, like, so that energy of that, like Comic-Con and blurtiness has its own energy and its own language and its own teen speak. So as I go into those different like narrative voices, and that's what takes over me. And still my own like sense of lyricism and my own sense of like, okay, do I need one more beat for this sentence to kind of get that full muscularity? People call my work, like my writing, like kind of acrobatic, it loves that. Like it just that's what gives me so much joy with language. I really, 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 really am a word nerd. Yeah. So I'm a word nerd. I collect, words like other nanas collect tchotchkes. I just love that stuff. I really do. So like, once a word is in this memory bank and it's just like, oh, that would be perfect. Like it'll just naturally come out. I'm just like, okay, that goes into there. So like my brain is constantly making all those various metaphors and illusions constantly. It's ridiculous. It's annoying sometimes. So I
love the metaphors, right? The illusions, that care. It's beautifully done. And as you were talking, that play of both light. I love how the characters can be flirty and light. We can be invited to laugh with them, and then they can also be serious. It's the fact that you, I guess, give yourself permission to write characters who I don't often see them written, right? And people say that, but really, when people think serious literature, they don't think of this work, right? You take us into all these places, the Ceylon, just Black girls hanging out, African, the baby shower, people, dialogue, very natural to the characters. And it's like that, it's fun. Then it's also, they're people, they're not caricatures.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want, because I think like unfortunately, sometimes when people think about serious literature or even African literature, they like a certain type of pathos, and like there's always got to be almost like, everything has to be like gloom and doom. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. And I love that stuff. I love I love art when our literature shows the depths of human emotion, and things can be very profound. But I think there's profundity even in comedic moments, right? Because sometimes comedy is just like pain plus time equals comedy, right? So sometimes that there's something to laugh at even in those moments where you feeling where things hurt. So I'm one of those people who just I like to want to explore the gamut and range of our human emotions. We're not just noble savages, or we're just not here to provide trauma porn. We laugh, we cry, we get petty, everything, So I think that's what I really like. I want my dialogue to do, I want my characters to do. I want them to feel real. I want them to have everyday concerns just as much as those larger geopolitical concerns. So.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So our listeners, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. All right. We have a great question for you, Nana, from Naomi Taranto, and it says, Nana, please tell us more about the beautiful book art installation behind you. Is it something you created?
Well, this installation, man, I'm gonna have to put something up on Instagram, because I have behind the scenes photos of myself actually making this thing, So I'm just gonna have to do that, so people know for once and for because people have been very fascinated by it. So you remember this thing? I was just talking to you and Chelsea about this before we started. This was initially an 8 by 8 foot tall wall of books that my friend and I made together. My friend Shaylin, she's a photographer in Iowa City, and we wanted to make a backdrop for my author photos. It was very DIY realness. We're giving you fabulousness on a budget, right? We were just making things from scratch. I got some free palettes off of Craigslist, and got free books from Goodwills and other thrift stores. I'd taken a book binding class at Iowa Center for the Book, so I knew how to cut the books down into several pieces. So I'm there cutting out old books, their spines, and I'm keeping them from the landfill and recycling them into something beautiful. And so this is actually, people sometimes think it's a screensaver, but no, it's an actual it's an actual wall of books, but this is just one of the panels, and that was the whole process. We made it, we erected it, and took a whole bunch of wonderful photos that you can see some on my website and my media kit, and this is just one of them. So
people need to know you're an artist, because your apartment, I'm remembering the Iowa City apartment.
Yes, there's a link to my apartment. Yeah,
White chase lawn, white ottoman, beautifully done. This in itself an artwork as well.
Thank you so much, dear.
So now, because I was going to link the idea of genre, language, and theme to this idea of these women, these characters in this book, the women, because they make up most of the lead characters, but we have the men as well. They defy categorization, which is one of the things I love about this work. And it seems to me this book sort of plays with themes of questions of belonging, but then we have characters who then subvert that, right? That space you're talking about. And I see, for me, the genre itself and the language work to facilitate that in the story. The Comic-Con, for instance, story for me, it's this girl trying to find her own space in a world that's indelibly white, but trying to stamp herself there. Also asking, who am I? Her parents wanted to, getting to do a prestigious degree at Princeton, if I'm not mistaken, right? She decides, even though she has this anxiety, she's just thinking about this third space that gives her joy, this sort of geeky space. So tell me about these sort of very interesting characters, because it's as though you pose the question about belonging, but it's not really about answering that question. It's as though the work seeks to subvert. For instance, our girl, the couple, there's a well-meaning couple who adopt a girl from Africa. They give this girl everything. In the end, she decides she wants to do her own thing. she subverts, she defies the projection, right? The category that she's been put in, and she wants to create a third space.
Yeah, I'm very, very interested in just, complicating the water, like, stirring the waters and just complicating the narrative of like characters who look like you and I, right? Like I'm very interested in having, my characters shown in with all the complexity that human beings, deserve. Like, what do their desires look like, sexual and otherwise? What is their minds and their thoughts and their hopes and their dreams look like? Like I, especially like you mentioned the Comic-Con story, right? So that idea of being the children of immigrants and coming here, and your parents are strivers, and they want for you a very safe, educational option. They want you to have a career being, like I call it, the high holy trinity of careers blessed by African parents, being a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer, right? And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, right? But for her, it's like her sense of like, oh, should I do this? But I'm also here. I'm an American, right? I want to kind of express, like, I want to have my individualized path, and that path might take me off that very well beaten trail that my immigrant parents have, set out, blazed for me, right? I might decide to do this geeky graphic writing thing that they're looking at you like, what graphic, what are you talking about? Stop it. So that idea of that being like a Bildungsroman, or Künstlerroman, actually, because it's like more so like the story of a young artist becoming, right? I wanted to, that was her own, like, sense of belonging and becoming. Like, she's literally in this geeky space where everybody at Comic-Con is wearing costume and make-believing. So she has to try to allow herself to make believe and imagine a life, beyond what the conventions her parents have laid out for her, right? Ditto, you talk about in like It Takes a Village, come say up with their girl, right? We have a young girl, like, she's allegedly been saved from the poor downtrodden existence she would have had, but she wants to subvert that, like that idea that, that she wouldn't have saved herself, if she had stayed back home, right? Even if she stayed on the continent, that maybe she had the moxie and the wherewithal to find her way out of her circumstances, and that maybe she didn't need her parents to become the great white and black saviors to her, this tropey idea of a downtrodden African girl, right? So I think that, I think that's real out here in these streets, right? So there are people who, I just wanted to explore the ideas of those, like those, like, that never underestimate, like, the idea of humanity and what we can be, or what we desire. That's just what I wanted to delve into.
Fantastic. So now, Nana, tell us about the life of the journey. How long did this take to put together? Were you aware you were doing a collection, or were you just writing, right? How, because the collection is very tricky, right? But it's eclectic stories, but somehow they come together. How long did this take to what's the journey behind this?
Honestly, like some of these journeys, like the journeys feel like, some of them feel like, of course you live a life, and some of you who you are comes into that. So, I mean, maybe it could be since childhood, but like one of the oldest stories is Kinks, right? And I think that one I wrote like maybe 11 or so years ago, where it was the first iteration. Of course, things like, mutate and grow over time, except for my first paragraphs, which pretty much say the same. But I think I first wrote it after I had like a terrible breakup with a guy who was a bit Kwame-esque in his own behavior.
Kwame,
I mean, but sometimes that stuff can be alluring, sometimes that Kwame dude can be sexy, because he's just like, oh, I'm just so sure of myself, my African masculinity is just like wafting off of me.
I was also falling for him in the book. He's in love with himself and Africa. I don't know if he can see the women around him, or a woman as a person.
So that is the thing, right? I think that, like, sometimes you deal with people who are like, they're more in love with ideas maybe than people themselves. So, I mean, but that, like, it takes a while to get to know that, right? Because especially like like a really smart person who's interested in the same culture that you come from, and there's something sexy about that. So I was just writing, I was interested in doing that whole, like, the conceit of like the hair, like being the like kind of thing that kind of divides and molds the story. I was just interested in that because what, Black girl, our hair stays changing. So, and then I was also just, just trying to make sense of that relationship and what that meant. Like, what was it like? What did I just get out of? And like, so I just started writing it, and like, though my person was not Kwame completely, there's some of the aspects were there, of course. And, it just allowed me to kind of explore some of the emotions of being in a relationship with, which might not be good for me, but with a person who had qualities that I found were attractive, and that, and what was that about? Like, what were like the things that I needed to learn about myself so that I, the next person would be much more simpatical with me. So it was interesting. That's how that started. So I would say like that was one of the oldest stories. Some stories like, I literally, I did like, I think the newest, most recent story was, let's see, The Living Internet, so I was writing, that's the mermaid story. So, I mean, I wrote them over a span of time, like, so, it was some of them like, they found new forms. And in terms of trying to put together a collection, I think like, people are just like, okay, you got enough stories, that's a collection. You never know when a collection is going to be a collection, especially like for someone like me who writes in so many different types of modalities. Like I didn't have any stories that were like, oh, they're all of the same vein and they're all of a type. So that became interesting to me because I think that sometimes there was a big emphasis when I was like, about to shop my book around, a big emphasis on like linked collections, right? So I was like, I don't know about me. I don't know. I don't know if I've got what you guys need. I mean, I feel like thematically there's some linkages, of course, and then and also the language, the preoccupation with the use of language in interesting ways. There's a linkage, but I'm just like, look, I don't know if you want every story to be like, every story's at Comic-Con or every story's, do it magical realist. I'm not your girl. So I was thankfully I found like, in Grey Wolf, a partnership with, with an editor who understood that like maybe that the collection is, just it represents all the things that interest me, so that can be a collection as well as something that was more traditionally, focused around one particular kernel,
And that's a treat. I think that's what makes this collection unique. And I haven't read.
Thank you, girl. But sometimes these marketing folks, they're just like, how can we, how can we hashtag this?
You don't fit the boxes. Like what boxes?
Exactly. They just want to tick a box and they're just like looking at you like cross-eyed because you just like, zombie what? Zombie who?
I think this will make for delicious conversations. Thank
you.
So I'm going to ask one final question. I want to be unfair. And say, if you had to choose.
Oh, Lord.
Just one. If I had to choose one, I'd say the zombie, because I don't know, that story is really sexy, all kinds of sexy. The zombie. I just was like, wow. So if you had to choose just one, and which one would be your favorite story? And
I keep on telling you guys, I'm gonna say to everybody, and I keep on saying this to my my interlocutors, you're not gonna selfie choice me. These are like my babies. You're asking me like, to send one child to the guillotine.
We all know that.
I do not play favorites. I say, well, this is what I do say. I say that like some of these children were more hard-headed and got on my nerves sometimes. Some of the children were like better behaved. So I would say that zombie story was one of my hard-headed kids because in terms of, yes, I love how it came out now, but once again, that's because Steve helped me whip that thing with the structure. I was struggling with structure with that story, girl, because I'm going back in time 30 years, and then I go back in time within the flashback. I'm just like, I don't know. But I loved the voice, and I just knew I had to do it and figure it out. But like, that took me a while. That was a very hard-headed child. I was a baby's kid of a story. So I do love the story and I love all my stories. But I think one of the easiest children to birth was the mermaid story. It just slipped out of me within like the course of like 5 days. Cause I did that. I did that during my Clarion West residency where we had to write a story a week, and it just like slipped out of me. It was like whoosh, the water broke and it's there. all puns intended. Yeah. So I think that was what it was. And so I mean, I think in terms of that more so than like, oh, which one is my favorite? Like, because I feel like they're all doing different things. And I feel like I didn't put any filler stories in there. I didn't put stories in there that I was like, yeah, I don't know about you, but you know, whatever. You know, I did stuff that I was interested in and wanted to try. And then, so I gave them my all, so.
Nana, so thank you so much. What you said gave you all. The ambition here. It's so evident on the page. You worked on this. This is true. It's art, and then it's fun. It's quirky. It's kinky. I think it's all things you in all this sort of eclecticness. Truly, I have not read a collection like this, and I encourage you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, darling. Thank you so much.
Exciting. We should do something. It'll be exciting to hear you do a little lecture about your work. Because the two, right? I think that the mixture of the quirky and serious, for me, it's such a liminal space.
All right, well, come through, Emerson. Like, have me over there. I'll come through.
I will do something, because this is amazing. Thank you so much. I had a few more questions, but out of time.
All right, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you so much, Novuyo and Nana, for such a fantastic conversation, and thank all of you for coming out and sharing the space for conversation and connection with us tonight. A reminder that you can buy Walking on Cowrie Shells through Greenlight bookstore. If you're local here to Brooklyn, we're open for limited capacity browsing noon to 7 p.m. daily, or you can shop online at greenlightbookstore.com. You can find that book buy link in the chat. And you can shop for local in-store pickup or for shipping anywhere in the US. Thank you both so much again for a wonderful evening, and everyone have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Greenlight. Thank you, Novuyo.